And here we are in a new year, and yet we're in an old series. We got to about the halfway point of the book of 1 Corinthians before we took a break for Christmas. And now we are back in this book that's going to carry us through the first handful of months of this year.
It is January 5th, my friends. And if you're like me, I start reflecting on about the last 8 or 9 weeks of life and all that we have experienced and lived through. And it's kind of like, whew, that was a lot. You think of the end of October, there was Halloween and festivities and family gatherings and things we're doing to their kids. And then you like wind down school that like slams into Thanksgiving. And then there's more family and friends and food and festivities. And then you have finals if you're a student. And then the semester ends. And then you regather with more family and friends for more food and festivities. And then you have the new year where you're celebrating with friends and family with festivities. And you start the year and you're going, that was a lot. And when you start thinking about some of those gatherings, specifically some of those that were prolonged with friends and family, some of the people that you love the most. Like I have an awesome family, extended family, love them. I have great friends. And as you hang out together, you realize we don't do everything the same. We don't value the same things. And even with my Christian friends and Christian family members, we don't actually think the same way about being a Christian. And you hang out for long enough, and grandparents, you get this, you're watching your kids parent your grandkids, and they're doing things that maybe you wouldn't want them to do. They're not modeling what you think good Christian behavior is. And so some of this like internal dialogue, and maybe you said something, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But it's like, should you do that? Like, can a Christian do that? Should a Christian go there, study there? Can a Christian eat that, drink that, ingest that, watch that? Can a Christian vote like that? And all of a sudden, there's some tensions in the family, specifically with believers like, hey man, we both believe in Jesus, and we're doing things a bit differently, and there's not a clear, explicit thing in the scriptures that prohibits it, but you just have this conviction, this feeling, based on what you know, that maybe you should or shouldn't do that. Well, we're jumping back into 1 Corinthians chapter 8. So if you are new to Calvary in the last 6 weeks, we had paused our series through a letter that Paul had written to a church in Corinth. And this church had many issues and many challenges, particularly on how to stay undivided, how to stay together when we as Christians affirm Jesus and then look around and say, can you do that? Should you do that? How do you live in the gray area?
With that being the case of getting back into a series, probably good to remind ourselves as to what is going on in this letter. We're in a section where he is directly addressing some of these issues. We left off before Christmas looking at their questions of marriage and singleness and the value and what is the right response from a Christian. And one of the reasons why there are so many difficulties in this church is because of the city in which it's located. A church existing in the city of Corinth would have come as an absolute shock.
Corinth is an actual place. You can visit it today. It's in the southern part of Greece. It's right by this isthmus channel. So here's a map. Here's Corinth. On that, it's the lower peninsula of Greece, and there's this small little connection, little waterway, in which became a central piece of trade called the isthmus. And so this was the original one. It was down to the ground, and so you would bring trade goods from the east up to its port city, and then you would unload your ships onto wagons and drag it across so that it would then be reloaded on ships going out to the west. And this would save you tons of money and time instead of going all the way around.
When we first started off the series, we talked a little bit about what Corinth was like as a city, and we said first that it was new. That about 100 years before Paul wrote this letter, the city was conquered and destroyed, only for the Roman Empire to realize, oh, this was an important trade hub, and so they rebuilt everything again. And with it being a new place, it's kind of like the founding of America. People flocked there because there was a chance to reinvent yourself, to create a new and better life for yourself. Which was rare in the first century. It normally just was, your life is set from birth. You're going to do your father's job like he did his father's job, and that was your life. but a new place allowed for new opportunities.
And so Corinth became kind of this epicenter of trade, which then brought in economic prosperity.
It was full of money. We talked about it as an important trade hub, and so there was a possibility of tremendous economic explosion. But the dream doesn't work out for everyone. And so there was also tremendous poverty in the city as well.
What Corinth was over the years was a religious center with lots of sensuality and religious temples. And so here's the modern isthmus where you can actually go through the channel and you can get a ship through there. But here's the ancient city of Corinth. Here's the main street Corinth, where you can imagine the businesses and the shops. You can imagine Paul himself walking down kind of this main street, downtown Briggs, talking about Jesus Christ, engaging people in conversation about religious ideas over a cup of coffee. And what you see in the background is that mountain there. That's the Acro Corinth, and on the top of it, Aphrodite had a temple, and that temple worship was all about prostitution and sensuality because she was the goddess of love, and so they would send down the temple prostitutes and priests to service the town.
And it got to the point that this was Corinth's reputation. Fourth, it was known for its knowledge. The way you showed your status, your value, was by your boasting, your demonstrating of how much you knew, how wise and understanding you were. You would put down other people so that you can show, this is how valuable I am. This is how much I know.
And then it was also known for its entertainment and its sport and games. There was the Isthmus Games that were hosted there, which was second only to the Olympics.
And then finally, it was known for its spirituality. A count was done around the time of this letter that found 26 places of worship in the city. And we joked previously, that doesn't sound like all that much. There's more than 26 places of worship just on 120th right here. But at this time, in this culture, that was rare. You would normally just have one or maybe a few temples. There were a ton of places to worship. But not just to worship, because there were so many, the temples, the holy sites, would become places of business, of trade, of social gatherings, because these were the spots that they had. So this is where they would do all that comes with life.
And so what you see is the epicenter of social, economic, wealth, prosperity, entertainment, sport, game, a world that looks like ours.
And it got to the point that there was little to no separation between religion and secular life. To the point of how can they be so spiritual when they're known for their sexuality? They were seen as joined together. Same with all of these, the money, the knowledge, they're seen as joined together. And it's that piece of background information that I think most helps us in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, that there is little division between the religious and the secular parts of life.
And what Paul has done is he's coming through on a missionary journey talking about what Christ has accomplished, who Christ is, that there's forgiveness of sins that are being offered through his work, and people are receiving the gospel, and they're starting to gather in this first church. And so Paul hangs out for about 18 months teaching these believers who are coming out of that kind of world, an unchurched world, unchurched background, what does it look like to follow the ways of Jesus? What does it look like to practice these new ways, new habits of Jesus? Well, he hangs out for about a year and a half, and then he departs. And in his departure, as often happens in churches, it got really messy. Messy people fill the churches. You're messy, I'm messy, you're imperfect, I'm imperfect. We're in relationship. I offend you, you can offend me. How do we stay together? Specifically when we gather and think differently about some things of what it means to really be a Christian.
Because the context, the question that's brought up is it appropriate to eat meat sacrificed to idols? And there's people in the church who say, yes, this is not a problem. They don't see it as a problem to do this. That this meat that would be offered to all these different deities would then be sold on. And they saw it was normal to buy the meat that was once used in a religious ceremony to a false god. They saw it as normal to be invited to someone's house for dinner only to realize that the food came from a temple. They saw it was normal to go to the temple to eat, to have dinner with someone. There's some sort of religious ceremony to begin with, but this is just what you did. This was what night on the town looked like in the city of Corinth. And so while some people felt this freedom, we read about other people in the church that do not feel that same freedom. who do not feel that it is appropriate or possible to eat this meat that's sacrificed to idols.
And the people in the church are asking this question, okay, hold on a second. We left that life behind. We're now following Jesus Christ. We're not going to participate in the other aspects of temple worship, obviously, but can you participate in this element of it? Or would that be unbecoming of a Christian? And people have different ideas of what it means to be obedient to Jesus. And so they had written Paul and asked Paul about this. And so now when we get into chapter 8, we're seeing Paul's response to a question they asked: should Christians eat this?